The Tonight Show had seen thousands of interviews, laughter, surprises, viral moments, but nothing could prepare the studio for what was about to happen. Jimmy Fallon sat across from Morgan Freeman, one of Hollywood's most iconic voices, ready for another lighthearted segment. The audience was buzzing with anticipation. The cameras were rolling. Everything seemed perfect until Jimmy mentioned a name, just one name. And in that instant, Morgan Freeman, the man whose voice had narrated countless stories, who had commanded respect in every role, who had never faltered on camera, fell completely silent. His eyes closed. His hand moved to cover his mouth. The studio froze. Jimmy's smile faded. The cards in his hand dropped onto the desk. For the first time in the Tonight Show's history, a guest couldn't answer. And what followed was a moment so raw, so human that it reminded everyone watching that beneath the fame, the awards, and the legendary status, we are all just people carrying stories too heavy to speak aloud. Subscribe and leave a comment because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. It started like any other Tuesday night taping. The Tonight Show studio buzzed with its usual pre-show energy. Audience members filed into their seats, phones out, excitement palpable. The Roots tuned their instruments, the familiar rhythm of preparation filling the air. Jimmy Fallon reviewed his note cards backstage, running through the planned segments with his producers. Tonight's guest was special Morgan Freeman, promoting his latest film, A Legend. An easy interview, or so everyone thought. Morgan arrived early as he always did, professional, gracious. He shook hands with the crew, exchanged warm greetings with the Roots, and settled into the green room with his characteristic calm presence. At 86 years old, he had done thousands of interviews. He knew the rhythm, the banter, the carefully crafted anecdotes designed to entertain without revealing too much. But there was something Jimmy's producers didn't know. Something Morgan hadn't mentioned in any pre-in. A wound that had never fully healed. A name that if spoken would crack the carefully constructed facade of the man the world knew as unshakable. The show began as it always did. Jimmy's monologue landed perfectly. The audience laughed in all the right places. Commercial breaks came and went, and then it was time. Ladies and gentlemen, Morgan Freeman. The applause was thunderous. Morgan walked out with that distinctive stride, waving to the crowd, settling into the guest chair with practiced ease. The first few minutes were exactly what everyone expected. Stories from the set, jokes about getting older, Jimmy doing his signature impressions, the audience eating it all up. But then Jimmy picked up a specific card, one his producers had prepared based on public records, one that seemed innocent enough, one that mentioned a name from Morgan's past. I read that you once worked with a theater director named Samuel Blackwood back in the 1960s, Jimmy said, his tone light and conversational. Apparently, he was the one who told you that you had the voice that could move mountains. That's quite a compliment from he didn't finish the sentence, because the moment that name Samuel Blackwood left Jimmy's lips, everything changed. Morgan's expression, which had been open and animated, shut down completely. His eyes, which had been sparkling with humor just seconds before, suddenly glistened with something else entirely. His mouth opened slightly, as if to speak, but no words came out. His hand, which had been gesturing expressively, slowly rose to cover his mouth. He looked down, away from the cameras, away from Jimmy, away from the audience. The silence stretched. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, an eternity in live television. The audience, sensing something profound was happening, went completely quiet. Even the Roots, who usually filled awkward pauses with a musical cue, remained frozen, instruments lowered. Jimmy's producer, watching from the control room, reached for the commercial break button. But something stopped her. This wasn't a technical issue. This was something real unfolding in real time. Jimmy Fallon, who had built his career on quick wit and endless energy, did something that would define his legacy more than any viral sketch or celebrity game ever could. He set down his cards, not carefully placed them aside for a moment, but actually dropped them onto the desk, the slight sound of paper hitting would audible in the profound silence. He leaned forward, his entire body language shifting from entertainer to human being. "Morgan," he said softly, his voice barely picked up by the microphones. "I'm sorry. I didn't know what happened next." No one in that studio, and no one watching at home could have predicted. Morgan Freeman took a slow, shaking breath. When he finally looked up, there were tears streaming down his face. Not the single dignified tear of a film scene. Real tears. The kind that come from a place so deep that no amount of professional composure can hold them back. Samuel Blackwood, Morgan finally said, his legendary voice cracking on each syllable. Save my life. The audience remained silent, but you could feel the collective lean forward. Every person in that studio was now part of something intimate, something sacred. Jimmy didn't rush him, didn't try to lighten the mood, didn't reach for a joke or a transition. He just waited, gave Morgan the space to breathe, to gather himself, to decide if he wanted to continue. I was 28 years old. Morgan began, his voice steadier now, but still thick with emotion. I was nobody. I had done some small theater, some bit parts, but I was ready to quit. I had a wife, bills to pay, and dreams that seemed more foolish with every passing day. I was going to take a job at the post office. I had already filled out the application. He paused, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Jimmy, without hesitation, pulled out his own pocket square and offered it across the desk. Morgan took it with a small, grateful nod. Samuel Blackwood was directing a small production in Harlem. Someone told him about me, and he asked me to audition. I almost didn't go, but something I don't know what made me show up that day. The studio remained utterly still. Even the camera operators had stopped their usual adjustments, afraid to make any sound that might break the moment. I walked into that theater, Morgan continued, and Samuel was sitting in the third row. Just him. No assistants, no other actors, just this old black man with white hair and the kindest eyes I'd ever seen. He asked me to do a monologue. Any monologue. I chose something from Athol. And when I finished, he stood up, walked down to the stage, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "Young man, you have a voice that could move mountains, but more than that, you have a soul that needs to speak. Don't you dare walk away from this. The world needs to hear what you have to say." Morgan's voice broke again. Jimmy's eyes were now visibly wet too. Behind them, Questlove from the Roots had his hand over his heart. In the audience, several people were openly crying. "He gave me the lead role," Morgan said. "He paid me out of his own pocket because the production had no budget. He invited me to his home for dinner. He introduced me to people who could help my career. He believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. And he did all of this knowing he was dying. Stage 4 cancer. He had 3 months to live when we met. He spent those 3 months making sure I understood that my voice mattered." The weight of that revelation settled over the studio like a heavy blanket. But Morgan wasn't finished. The night our show closed, Morgan said, his voice barely above a whisper, "Now Samuel gave me a gift." It was a small leather journal. Inside the front cover, he had written, "Your voice will outlive both of us. Use it to tell stories that matter. Use it to give hope to the young man sitting in an audience somewhere, wondering if his dreams are foolish. Tell him they're not. Tell him I said so." Morgan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a worn leather-bound journal, small enough to fit in a palm, clearly decades old. He held it up for the cameras. "I've carried this with me for 58 years. He said, "Every film, every interview, every award show, it's always in my pocket. Because Samuel Blackwood saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. And I made him a promise sitting in his hospital room 3 weeks before he died that I would never forget what he taught me. That I would use my voice to lift up others the way he lifted me up." Jimmy Fallon stood up. He didn't plan it, didn't calculate it. He simply stood, walked around his desk, and embraced Morgan Freeman. Not for the cameras, not for the viral moment, just human to human. And the audience, as if released from a spell, erupted, but it wasn't applause. Not yet. It was something deeper. A collective exhale, a shared recognition that they had witnessed something profound. When Jimmy returned to his seat, he didn't immediately try to move the interview forward. He sat there looking at Morgan and said, "Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for trusting us with that story." Morgan nodded, composing himself. "I don't talk about Samuel often," he admitted. "It's still hard, even after all these years. But when you said his name, it all came back. The fear I had, the doubt. The moment someone saw past all of that and told me I mattered. Every young person struggling to find their voice needs a Samuel Blackwood. Someone who believes in them when they can't believe in themselves." The interview continued, but the energy had shifted entirely. What was supposed to be a light-hearted promotional appearance had become something else. A masterclass in vulnerability. A reminder that the stories we carry shape us long after the people who gave them to us are gone. Behind the scenes, something else was unfolding that would cement this moment in tonight's show history. During the commercial break, Jimmy's producer approached him with tears in her eyes. "We've never had anything like this," she said. "The phones are ringing off the hook. Social media is exploding. People are sharing stories about their own Samuel Blackwoods. The people who believed in them, the mentors who changed their lives. But more than that, something was happening in the studio audience. People weren't just sitting in their seats waiting for the show to resume. They were talking to each other. Strangers sharing their own stories of the teachers, coaches, parents, and friends who had told them their voice mattered. The studio had become a temporary community bound together by the recognition that we all carry these moments. These people, these names that when spoken remind us of who we might have been without them. When the show returned from commercial, Jimmy made a decision that broke every rule in the late-night television playbook. Instead of moving to the next segment, instead of playing a game or showing a clip, he turned to the audience. "How many of you," he asked, "have a Samuel Blackwood in your life? Someone who believed in you when you couldn't believe in yourself?" Nearly every hand in the studio went up. "Tell me," Jimmy said, pointing to a woman in the third row. "Who is yours?" "My high school English teacher, Mrs. Patterson," she said, her voice shaking. "I was going to drop out. She told me I was the best writer she'd ever taught. She made me promise to finish. I did. I'm a journalist. Now." Jimmy pointed to another person and another. For 5 minutes in the middle of a tightly scripted television show, people shared names, faces, stories. The cameras captured it all. Morgan Freeman sat in his chair, tears still streaming, nodding at each story as if blessing them. "This," Jimmy said, turning back to Morgan, "is what you've done tonight. You've reminded all of us that we don't make it alone. That someone somewhere sees us before we see ourselves. And that's worth remembering. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten." After the show ended, after the audience had filed out, after the cameras stopped rolling, Morgan Freeman did something unprecedented. He asked to speak to the crew. Not the producers or the executives. The crew, the camera operators, the sound technicians, the people who make television happen but rarely get acknowledged. They gathered on the stage, perhaps 30 people, confused but curious. Morgan stood before them, still holding that worn leather journal. Samuel Blackwood wasn't famous. He said he wasn't rich. He never won awards or had his name in lights. But he changed my life by seeing me really seeing me. Not what I could do for him. Not what I represented. Just me. And I want you to know that I see you. Every one of you. The work you do matters. The care you put into your craft matters. And if there's someone in your life who needs to hear that their voice matters, tell them. Don't wait. Don't assume they already know. Tell them. One of the younger camera operators, a woman in her 20s, raised her hand timidly. "Mr. Freeman, can I ask you something?" He nodded. "Do you think Samuel knew? How much he meant to you? How much he changed everything?" Morgan smiled, the first genuine smile since Jimmy had mentioned that name. "I told him 3 days before he died. I sat next to his hospital bed, and I told him that he had saved my life, that I would carry his words with me forever. And you know what he said?" The crew leaned in. He said, "I didn't save you, son. I just reminded you who you already were." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of recognition, full of gratitude, full of the understanding that we are all connected by these moments, these people, these names that change everything. That night, JimmyFallon went home and called his high school drama teacher. A man he hadn't spoken to in 20 years. A man who had told him when he was 17 and terrified that making people laugh was a gift, not a distraction. He thanked him. Really thanked him. Morgan Freeman's appearance became the most watched Tonight Show clip in the show's history. Not because of spectacle, not because of celebrity, but because of truth. Raw, unfiltered human truth. And somewhere in thousands of homes across the country, people picked up their phones and called their Samuel Blackwoods, their teachers, their coaches, their mentors, the people who saw them when they couldn't see themselves. Because that's what happens when we dare to be vulnerable. When we let the walls come down, when we honor the names that shaped us, we give others permission to do the same. JimmyFallon still keeps that image in his mind. Morgan Freeman holding that worn leather journal, tears on his face, voice cracking with emotion. It reminds him that his job isn't just to entertain. It's to create space for moments like this. Moments that remind us we're all human, all fragile, all saved by someone who believed in us before we believed in ourselves. The Tonight Show returned to its usual format the next night. Games, sketches, laughter. But everyone who had been in that studio on that Tuesday night carried something with them. A reminder that beneath the lights and the cameras and the performance, there are real stories, real pain, real love. And sometimes all it takes is one name to unlock it all.